Parshas Toldot, Tavshin Pei Daled. The learning should be in memory of those who perished on October 7th. It should be a merit refuah shlema for those who have been wounded. It should be a merit for protection for the soldiers who are fighting in Gaza, and a merit for freedom for those who have been taken captive. All right, so what I want to focus on tonight is going to be the Torah's description of Yitzchok's love for Esav. So let's start from Perek Chafei, chapter 25, Pasuk Chav Zayin, verse 27. Vayigdalu hana-arim, this is already after Yaakov and Esav are born. Vayigdalu hana-arim, and the lads grew up. Vayi Esav ish yodei ish sada. Esav was one who knows trapping. He was a man of the field. V'Yaakov ish tam, Yaakov was a wholesome man. Yoshev v'Yohalim, sitting in tents. What was he doing in tents? He was studying Torah in tents. So once they become Gedolim, once they become Bar Mitzvah age, it becomes clear that they are taking diverging paths. Esav is out in the field hunting. Yaakov is sitting in the tents of Torah and studying. Now, Pasuk Chav Ches, verse 28. Vayav Yitzchok as Esav kitzayid befiv. Yitzchok loved Esav kitzayid befiv. We will just translate that as, right now, as because trapping was in his mouth. V'Rivka heves says Yaakov, and Rivka loved Yaakov. Now, when the Torah says Yitzchok loved Esav, doesn't mean he didn't love Yaakov, but he had a special place in his heart for Esav. He loved Esav. He had a special love for Esav in his heart over his brother Yaakov. Rivka, on the other hand, loves Yaakov. And she has something, doesn't mean she doesn't love Esav. She loves Esav too. But she has a love for Yaakov more. And the Torah describes why is it that Yitzchok loved Esav more? Kitzayid befiv, for trapping in his mouth. So what does that mean? So Rashi in his commentary brings down two explanations. The first explanation is the explanation of Unkelos, the Targum, the Aramaic translation of Unkelos, that reads like this: Urechem Yitzchak es Esav. Yitzchak loved Esav. Are mitzeidei hava ochel, for he would eat from his trapping. That means Esav would trap animals and feed the meat to Yitzchak, his father. And because of that, Yitzchak loved Esav more than Yaakov. That needs explanation. Just because he was feeding him food, that's why he loved him more? I mean, it's clear, as the Torah says, it's not like Yitzchak didn't know what Esav was spending his time doing and what Yaakov was spending his time doing. He knew what they were doing. So because of the fact that Esav feeds him from the animals that he traps, that's what makes him more beloved than Yaakov? That needs explanation. Now, Rashi then brings down a medrash, the midrashic interpretation. And the midrashic interpretation revolves around the following. When the pasuk says kitzayid befiv, for trapping or game was in his mouth. Whose mouth? So according to the Unkelos that we just said, it refers to the mouth of Yitzchak. Mitzeidei hava ochel. Yitzchak ate from what Esav trapped. So kitzayid befiv, the trapping in his mouth, means the trapping of Esav was in Yitzchak's mouth. But the medrash says differently, that the piv, when we say the word his mouth here, whose mouth we're referring to? Referring to the mouth of Esav. And kitzayid befiv means for trapping in his mouth. Esav was hunting, Esav was trapping with his mouth. He was trapping and tricking his father. He would portray himself, he would ask certain types of questions that would make him look righteous. And Yitzchak was impressed with these questions, and that is what made Yitzchak love Esav more than Yaakov. Kitzayid befiv, because Esav was trapped with Shayatzad Oisai. Esav was trapping with his mouth. He was trapping his father. He was making his father think he was righteous when he really wasn't. Now, Rashi doesn't tell us exactly what was he saying. How was he fooling his father? But the Medrash tells us that he would ask him the following questions. Esav would ask that we know that Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, in their household, they kept the Torah. They knew the Torah already. And we know that one of the mitzvahs of the Torah is Maser, where we take off truma for a Kohen. From what's left, we give a tenth to the Levi. where there is a concept of tithing from our produce in the Torah. And this was something that Abraham, Yitzchok, and Yaakov practiced. I'm not sure exactly what they gave it to, but they practiced it. And so Esav would ask the following question. Esav would ask his father, how does one tithe salt? How does one tithe straw? These were the questions that Esav would ask Yitzchok. And that is how he fooled Yitzchok into thinking that he was righteous. Now, what's so special about these questions? Are these just random questions that Esav was asking Yitzchok? We're just giving, these are just some examples of what he was asking. And the whole idea is just that he was asking, is there something more unique here? It sounds like there is. It sounds like there's something special, something about this question itself, about tithing salt and about tithing straw. What's even more peculiar is the fact that, when it comes to tithing, we only tithe, the Torah's obligation to tithe is on produce, is on food. There is no obligation to tithe salt. There's no obligation to tithe straw. Salt is not a food on itself. It seasons food, but it's not food itself. So there's no requirement to tithe salt. And straw is not food either. It's not food. So why is Esav even talking about tithing that? There's no law of tithing that at all. So the commentaries explain that when Esav is asking about salt and about straw, what he's really showing Yitzchak is that I know we don't have to tithe these things, but I want to go beyond the letter of the law, and I want to tithe them anyway. So Esav is portraying himself as someone who wants to go beyond the letter of the law. Oh, that impresses his father. And that's why his father loves Esav special, because Esav is showing his the pshat seems to be, the explanation is to be, Esav is showing his sincerity, his righteousness, with these kinds of questions, going beyond the letter of the law, and that's what makes him beloved. But there's a problem. And the problem is the following. The problem is that later on in the Parsha, by the story where Yitzchok, towards the end of it, when he gets older, wants to bless Esav, and instead of Esav getting the blessings, Yaakov gets them. And when this whole part of the Parshat episode begins, so the Torah says like this. This is in Perek Chav Zayin. And we're going to start from Pasuk Gimel, verse 3, which is where Yitzchak gives Esav directions about what he wants him to do. Now, sharpen your utensils, your gear. Which is your sword and your bow. Go to the field, and catch game there for me. So Yitzchak tells Esav to sharpen his gear. Why is Yitzchak telling him to sharpen his gear? Esav is a professional. He knows what to do. He knows how to deal with his gear. Why is Yitzchak telling him to sharpen it? So Rashi makes the following comment. Rashi says that, and then this is also based on the Medrash, sharpen your knife and slaughter properly, so that you shouldn't feed me a unslaughtered animal. As we said before, the Abbas, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov kept the Torah, and therefore their meat was shechted. It went through what we call ritual slaughter, the special slaughtering that we do on animals to be able to eat the meat. Now, Yitzchak is telling. Now, one of the things that is very important when it comes to slaughtering an animal is that the knife that you use must be absolutely sharp. There should be no nicks. It shouldn't be dull. It has to be absolutely sharp. Yitzchak tells Esav, make sure you sharpen your knife and shecht well so that you don't feed me an unslaughtered animal. He has to tell Esav to sharpen his knife properly. Well, if the reason Yitzchak loves Esav is because he sees Esav as such a special person, a special tzaddik, that he even wants to go beyond the letter of the law, and he's still late. This is years later from what we began with. This is already Esav is a grown man. This is many years later, after we start learning about when the boys get older. It's many years later. And he still has to tell Esav, make sure you sharpen your knife well. If Esav is so sincere and so righteous, he has to tell him to sharpen his knife well? What's going on? Not only that, later on the other part of the pasuk where it says, "V'suda litzayid," and hunt game for me from the field. There again, the Medrash says that Yitzchok's message to Esav was, "Men hahefker," make sure the animals you trap are ownerless, v'lo min hagezel, and not from stolen. He has to tell Esav not to use, not to trap stolen animals. Don't bring me a stolen animal. If he's concerned with Esav's not shechting properly, he's concerned with Esav of stealing animals. So that means he doesn't trust Esav. He doesn't see Esav as that righteous. So if so, why are we saying he loves him so much? Because he asks him questions about how to go beyond the letter of the law. Beyond the letter of the law, he doesn't seem to be doing the law. And even if Metzay will say that Esav is not going to outright steal, but he's not always so careful, and he wouldn't just not slaughter the animal, but maybe he wouldn't be so careful. Maybe he needs a little bit more prodding to be more careful with the knife being sharp. Okay, so he's not that wicked. He's not that bad. But again, you have to tell him to sharpen the knife. You got to tell him, make sure you're not taking from animals that don't belong to you, that don't really belong to you. Again, that's the person that he loves more than Yaakov, because he's also asking questions that shows he wants to go beyond the letter of the law when he's not even keeping what seems to be the actual law. So this is a problem. So I want to share with you what I think is a very novel and interesting approach given by the Be'er Yosef of how Yitzchok perceived Esav. And the Be'er Yosef's explanation is going to deal with how to understand why, if we learn like the Unkelus explained, why Yitzchok loved Esav more because he ate his game. And we're going to give an explanation to that. And we're going to give an explanation also if we're saying that that he was trapping him with his mouth, what does that mean? With these questions, what does that mean exactly? So the Be'er Yosef says like this: we find in many Torah writings that there is a concept that you could have two people. One person is born with a more holier nature, a more pure nature, a nature that lends itself to the service of Hashem. Then you have another person who's born with a nature that his nature drags him away from his service to Hashem. He's lustful. He's aggressive. He has lots of what we call, he's born with some serious character flaws. He's born with being lustful and looking for gratification, looking for physical gratification. That's his natural tendency. That's how he's been born. So that person has a struggle. And that person, because of their struggles, they actually may not be able to reach certain levels of purity, sanctity, of even scholarliness, like the person who doesn't have to struggle as much. The person whose tendencies lead him, his natural habits and tendencies lead him to the service of Hashem. He's not overly lustful. No one's going to be perfect. We're not talking about angels. But he's not overly lustful. He's patient. He doesn't have a temper. He's not hot-headed. He's not aggressive. He's very sensitive. He's very gentle. That's his nature. So you've got these two people. One has a nature, let's call it a more spiritual nature. One has a more physical, mundane nature. So clearly, the person who has that more spiritual nature has some advantages to the state that he's in. But he doesn't struggle as much as the other person. And if the other person struggles to overcome his tendencies, and he does so, he has a greater merit than the person who doesn't struggle. Pirkei Avos teaches us, from Tzara Agra, the more the effort, the harder it is, the greater the reward. So that means that if you have a person who is struggling, and again, because of his struggling, he may not be able to reach certain heights that the other person who is a more natural tzaddik can reach, but at the same time, he's struggling, he's overcoming. And that gives him a greater merit, even more than the person who's more spiritual and maybe accomplishing more. Yitzchok sees Esav like that. That's Esav. Esav has his natural tendencies had tendencies of aggressiveness, tendencies of being more mundane and physical. When Esav was born, now to be specific, as the Ber Yosef points out, when Esav is born, the Torah describes him, Vayetz Rishon Admoni, the first one emerged red, Kuloi Kader Seyar, all of him like a hairy mantle. Esav was born red. I don't know if red means hair, complexion, both, but he's born red. And the Talmud tells us if you're born red, red represents blood. That means you have tendencies towards blood. You have tendencies towards spilling blood. That's what the Talmud says it means. Esav was born with that tendency. If he's born red, that's his nature. Esav is born with a more, perhaps also red, maybe means also passion, anger. Esav was not born with the greatest qualities. He really wasn't. Now, the Talmud says that if a person is born red, which means he has these tendencies of spilling blood, so what does that mean? He's done? He's finished? He's lost? He has no hope? What it means is that he has a choice. He can deal with that tendency in the right way or in the wrong way. If he has some kind of a tendency towards spilling blood, who says spilling blood has to be that he'll be a murderer? Which Esav was. It doesn't mean you have to be that. There are other ways of spilling blood. There are good ways to spill blood. You could be a sheikhet. You could be you could slaughter animals. You could be a moil. You could be a person who circumcises boys. You can spill blood, but doing it the right way. So the Talmud says that's what happens when the person is born a person is born red. Take that tendency and use it in the right way. Yitzchok looked at Esav, and he saw Esav was Admoni. He was red. Esav was not Yaakov. He didn't have the zitzfleish. He couldn't sit that long. He had shpilkas. He couldn't go ahead and sit that long. He had that fiery tendency. He was wild. He was aggressive. He was outgoing, active. So so what did he do with that? What did he do with those tendencies? He became a hunter. A hunter is the equivalently of a sheikhet. Why not? He traps the animals. He takes care of the animals. He sells the meat. Not only that, what did he do with this meat? At least with some of the meat. Regularly, what did he do with this meat? He gave it to his father. He did kibbutz av. He did the mitzvah of honoring his father. When the Talmud talks about you want to know what it means to honor a parent, one of the examples are to feed them. And that's what Esav was doing. So there he is. He takes his tendency of spilling blood. He goes out, he traps the animals, he slaughters the animals, and he gives his father the meat to eat. Yitzchok sees that Esav is taking his tendencies, he's taking his habits, and trying to use them the right way. He also sees that Esav asks questions. He asks questions. He's sincere. Esav is someone who is working on himself. Is he like Yaakov? He's not like Yaakov. He's not doing the same thing. But he's taking his tendencies, he's taking his struggles, and he's trying to divert it. He's trying to divert it, trying to guide it into the right path. Yitzchok is impressed with that. Because Yitzchok sees his questions, he's sincere, and he sees him going out and hunting. Yitzchok sees that as Esav trying to direct his tendencies in the right way. Now, Yitzchok doesn't know the other things that Esav was doing. Esav was doing some pretty bad things. Yitzchok didn't know about that. But from what he sees of Esav, he sees someone who is, again, not like his brother Yaakov, but someone that is working, someone that is taking his tendencies and trying to direct them in the right direction. That's what, and therefore, now we go back to what does it mean that Yitzchak loved Esav because side with him was feeding him? Feeding wasn't about the feeding, it wasn't about that he likes the meat. He was feeding him means Esav is taking his tendency for spilling blood and directing it into something good. He catches the animals and feeds his father. and he's doing a mitzvah with it. That's what it means he loves Esav. And Esav clearly has a struggle. And he's struggling, and he's directing it the right way. That's very meritorious. That's very special in Yitzchak's eyes. And in some ways, it gives him one over Yaakov. Yaakov is naturally holy. Yaakov has his whole nature lends itself to Torah study. Not Esav. Esav struggles, but he's trying to direct it into the right way. That's something special by Yitzchak. That's why Yitzchak loves Esav more. And at the same time, what does it mean when we say tzayid befiv, that he was trapping him with his mouth? That added to everything. The fact that he was trapping with his mouth, showing him how righteous he was, that he wants to even tithe salt, he wants to go beyond the letter of the law. Then that means Esav is someone who is sincere. He wants to do the right thing. And all this creates that perception that Yitzchak has of Esav, that Esav is someone who is trying to get a handle on his negative character traits and direct them in the proper way. Okay. Now, the thing is, though, that the Be'er Yosef does not bring in the question I mentioned before about, but what about at the end of the Parsha when Yitzchak tells Esav, sharpen your knife and make sure it's not from stolen animals? How do you deal with that? How do you make that concur with everything? Yitzchak thinks Esav is so righteous, but look, he has to tell him to sharpen the knife. He has to tell him not to steal, make sure that there aren't stolen animals. So that means he doesn't see Esav in a very positive light. So Rabbi Emanuel Bernstein in Eretz Yisrael, so he suggests the following. I think it's a very interesting idea. Again, it's very novel, and it's working with the same path of the Be'er Yosef. I'm not sure if he brings this, if he says this from someone else, but the approach that he gives is the following. Yes, Yitzchak understands that Esav needs to be told, sharpen your knife. That doesn't mean necessarily that Esav didn't care about knives. He never even bothered with it. But clearly, Yitzchak to tell him, you had to encourage him to make sure it's sharp as it should be. And does it mean that Esav was going ahead and actually stealing animals? No. Esav that could be. The Yitzchak understood Esav is not going to be as careful about these things as he should be. He'll be more lenient to decide, this animal is okay to take. But Yitzchak sees this as all part of Esav's struggle. Yes, Esav is a grown man now, and he's still struggling. He has his struggles. He has his struggles with other people's things. He has struggles with the idea, is he going to bother with this knife to make it so sharp? He has his struggles, but he's trying and he's working. So he may have his struggles, and he still needs to be taught. But when Esav is told by his father, make sure you sharpen the knife, he says, yeah, I will. And he will do it because he listened to his father. And if his father tells him, don't make sure the animals aren't stolen, make sure they are ownerless, Esav is going to listen. Esav is not going to fight back. He's not going to roll his eyes. He's going to accept what his father says, and he's going to do it. But he has a struggle. He's struggling. But Yitzchak still sees Esav as trying, as working on himself. The whole fact that he is being this hunter, and from his questions, it means that Esav is trying to work on himself. He's trying to get a hold of himself, trying to get a hold of his flaws, trying to deal with them. But he has them. And Yitzchak has to exhort him. Yitzchak has to encourage him, is to make sure that he gets it right. But it's all part of Esav's struggle and working on himself. Esav is born with some very, very serious flaws, character flaws. He's born damaged. That's just how he is. He's born with lots of negative tendencies. He's got a lot to work on. He's got a lot that he has to deal with. And Yitzchak perceives him as trying, as working on it. And therefore, he loves Esav because he sees an individual with a lot of challenges that he still doesn't always meet up to, but he keeps working and he keeps trying, and he gives Esav the credit that he feels he's due. And that's how we can put this all together by Yitzchak's perception. Now Yitzchak then wants to give Esav a bracha. And the way I understand that Rabbi Yosef is seeing the bracha here is, and he actually he says this, is that when Yitzchak wanted to give Esav a bracha, he gave, it's very interesting to note that the bracha that Yitzchak gave Esav, that was, again, this is the bracha that he gave Yaakov, thinking that it was Esav, but the blessing that he gave him was, V'yiten l'cha Elokim mital hashamayim mishmanei haaretz. God should give you from the heaven, from the dew of the heaven, and from the fat of the land. He is telling him that he should be blessed. He should be blessed with a productive land. It doesn't talk about trapping. It doesn't say you should be blessed to catch a lot of animals, good quality animals. So Ber Yosef suggests that Yitzchak was actually telling Esav, it's time to hang up the sword. It's time to hang up the bow and arrow. It's time to look for a different job. It's time to direct your energies in a different way. Direct your energies into agriculture. That's a lot safer way to go. It actually encourages belief in Hashem. Because at the end of the day, every farmer knows, the Talmud says this, that every farmer knows, at the end of the day, you can't make the rain. The rain has to come from Hashem. A farmer is always looking towards Hashem for help. So Yitzchak was giving Esav a bracha that he should be able to merit the blessings of the land. And in his mind, Esav can get those blessings because, again, Esav is a sincere person working on himself. And the Ber Yosef says, and when it comes to Yaakov, Yitzchak didn't give a blessing to Yaakov because he didn't think Yaakov needed a blessing. Yaakov studies Torah. Hashem is going to take care of Yaakov. He has the merits for Hashem to take care of him. Yaakov doesn't need the blessing. Esav needs the blessing. And it would seem, according to Ber Yosef, his approach working here is that the blessings could have gone to both. He would have had a blessing of the fruits of the land. He would have been blessed with fruits of the land. Both of them could have had a bracha. But again, Yaakov doesn't need the bracha. Yaakov has the merits that Hashem will take care of him. Okay. Now, at the end of the story, Rivka is not impressed with Esav. She's not impressed. It says she loves Yaakov. After all said and done, she knows what's going on. So much so that when it comes time to give Esav the blessing, she doesn't want him to get any blessing at all. Only Yaakov should get the blessing. How is it that Rivka saw through Esav and Yitzchak didn't? What did she have more? She's smarter. So the Ber Yosef explains she had something helping her the whole way. Because in the beginning of the Parsha, the Torah tells us, this is in Perek Chavei, chapter 25, Pasuk Chav Beis, verse 22. And the children were struggling within her. They were, the way they translated here, the children crushed within her. There was a lot of pushing, a lot of shoving between inside of her. And it was beyond the norm. So she had to find out what's going on. She said, if so, why is this to me? So she went to ask from God. Rashi says she went to Shem, the son of Noach, and his grandson, great-grandson Aver. They had a yeshiva, that academy of learning, of serving Hashem. And they were there, and they could find out for you from Hashem what's going on. Vayemer Hashem la. Next pasuk reads, pasuk Chav Gimel, verse 23. Vayemer Hashem la, and Hashem said to her, Shnei goyim b'vitneich. There are two nations in your belly. You don't have one kid, you have twins in there. Ushnei le'um mimayach peredu, and two nations from your me'ayach, from your inside, they are separated. They will be separated. And two regimes from your inside shall be separated. And one regime shall become strong from the other. The Rav Yavetzayer, and the elder shall serve the younger. Rivka had a prophecy that she has two children. And two children will become two nations, mime'ayach, from your insides they shall be separated. That means they're already separated from the very beginning. These two children, these two nations within you are separated. They're going in completely separated ways. which means and a nation will become strong from the other. That means when one is going to be successful, the other one is not. They're both not going to be successful together. So Rivka already has a prophecy telling her, your children are going to go in completely different paths. Therefore, when they actually separate paths, when they go separate ways, Rivka says, here's the prophecy. I just got to take a look now and see who's going on the right path, who's going on the other path. That's what it meant. The two nations are going to be separate. They're going to be completely separate ways of doing things. One is going to be righteous, one is not going to be righteous. That was the deeper meaning of this prophecy. Two nations, one a nation that's going to be righteous, a nation of God, and one that's not. So when they get older and she sees Esav, he's running around in the fields hunting, and Yaakov is studying Torah, she already now has the prophecy to plug in and say, okay, it looks like Esav is going to be the one that's going to be not right. That's going to be, the divergence is right here. One is righteous, one isn't righteous. She has the prophecy already to let her understand who is what. And the prophecy says one will be strong from the other. It means they both can't be strong together. Therefore, if Esav gets the blessing from Yitzchok of the blessings of the land, which means he'll be successful, then that means Yaakov isn't successful. And therefore, she has to make sure Esav doesn't get the blessing at all, only Yaakov. Now, the famous question is, well, if Rivka had this prophecy to help her out, why didn't she tell Yitzchok? So commentaries say that Rivka understood that the fact that she went to ask God what's going on, and she received an answer, that this was a message to her. It was not something for her to pass on. If Hashem wanted Yitzchok to know, Yitzchok was a prophet. Hashem could tell him. The commentaries discuss this, so we're not going to focus on this so much right now. But at the end of the day, she didn't tell Yitzchok. So Yitzchok didn't have it. And this was all part of Hashem's plan. This is how everything had to play itself out. But the difference between Yitzchok and Rivka is, Rivka has the prophecy, Rivka has what to work with to figure out who's what and what's going on. Yitzchok doesn't. So Yitzchok perceived Esav as righteous, struggling, but sincere and righteous. And trying to be good and striving to be better. And therefore he feels he has a certain special love for Esav and wants to give him the blessings. Rivka, based on the prophecy that these are two children that are split, they're going to go completely separate ways. One is going to be righteous, one's not. All she has to take a look at seeing how Esav lives and Yitzchak lives to know which direction Esav is really taking and what direction Yaakov is taking. And therefore, she right away knew what was going on. That's why she loved Yaakov, and that's why she made sure that only Yaakov should get the blessings. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful evening.